way. And of course, justice is the operative word here because that's what we're going to be studying. Anybody know who that is, who that group is? I bet you know who that group is. Not that picture, but you know who that group is, right? Who is it? What are they called as a group? No, the Justice League of America. Now, I didn't want to show you later versions of it because, like I say, it looks like all the guys, all they ever do is spend time in the gym, and the women in there look like they're pole dancers, so I just couldn't show you that one. That was just way over the top. But anyway, this is known as the Justice League of America. What did all of these people do? They fought evil. They righted wrongs. They protected the innocent, didn't they? The Justice League, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. Who is that? The who? It's the Supreme Court. What'd you call it? The Halloween Court? One of those people is no longer with us. Justice Scalia passed this year, and that position has not been filled yet. But these are known as the Supreme Court Justices. And I can name a few of them. I recognize Scalia, and I believe that's Sotomayor, right? And that's John Roberts. I tell you what, let's do this. It'll be a whole lot easier for me. Okay, there they are except for Scalia. You know, I didn't even know this man existed, and I didn't know this man existed. And I vaguely knew that Kagan existed, and the others I was kind of aware of their names. But when I saw Kennedy, I went, Kennedy? Who's that? Breyer or Breyer? I'm not sure how you pronounce it. How does he pronounce it? Breyer? Okay, of course, the ice cream. I didn't know they existed. But these are the justices of the Supreme Court. So guess what we're talking about today? His eighth virtue is justice. So now I'm done with that, and we can shut that down. So we're looking at Ben Franklin's virtue that he tried to achieve of justice, and his phrase that he used to describe it, and it's a little archaic sounding. He says, wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Now that doesn't really clarify it that much, does it? It's kind of confusing. Interestingly enough, the one that we did last week, sincerity, includes in the description of thinking justly, which kind of overlaps immediately with this one. We speak of justice in a lot of different ways. Quite often when we refer to justice, I guess the most often when we refer to justice, it has to do with punishment for crimes, right? We say justice was served, or we got justice, or a person is a fugitive from justice. And so when we talk about justice in that sense, we are talking about punishment. That's kind of the negative side of justice. Justice has both a positive and a negative side. Another way that we and I think Benjamin Franklin is primarily looking at the positive side of it, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. We also talk about social justice or social injustice. Yes?
I think today a lot of people think of justice as retribution for me.
Yeah, to pay me back for wrongs that were done to me. Yeah, that sometimes is how we define justice. Any other thoughts on that? What's social justice or social injustice? What's that? Is that?
That's when you benefit and I don't.
Okay. Do some people in our society not get fair treatment? As a general group, maybe? Or they get unfairly good treatment as a general group? It can go both ways, right? Which unfair good treatment is also treated as bad because it excludes somebody else from that unfair good treatment. But still, that phrase means a lot of different things to people. Sometimes it's even used to describe the redistribution of wealth, isn't it? You have more than I do. That's not just. I should get some of it. Okay, I think I disagree with that. But certainly, social injustice or social justice involves the fair treatment of people in society without regard for any unrelated aspect of that, such as race or sex or political views or whatever, you know. Social justice, I guess, suggests that we are blind to. You remember the what's the symbol for justice? I wish I'd have put it up there. What does justice look like? What's she hold? It's a woman. What's she holding? She's holding what? She's holding scales. I think she may even have a sword in the other hand. But she's holding a set of scales, meaning unbiased, a fair system. And what else do we notice about justice? She's blindfolded. In other words, justice should be blind. It shouldn't pay attention to anything about the person that's not directly related to the question of justice. So just because you are a man, for example, doesn't mean you're wrong, ladies. In your mind, we may be, but but in a court of law, that doesn't hold water. Okay, and there is another aspect of this. I am justified in doing so and so, which means I have a reason or an excuse, at least in my mind, for doing something. I'm justified. What does it mean to be a just person in your mind? You treat people fairly. Some people, how else can it be defined in a... treating people fairly is a great definition of a just person. It can also mean a person who does right in general in their lives. It's almost a synonym for righteous. In fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, it'll give as synonyms. Let me see if I can see. Yeah, in fact, it's way on down. It uses words like fairness, impartiality, honesty, righteousness, morality. And sometimes, I think today we're probably going to be talking more about fairness and what did I say? Fairness and impartiality, but it can mean a lot more than that. For a very long time, thousands of years, philosophers have actually debated the meaning of justice. It's kind of like the question of beauty or goodness. It's this ethereal thing out there that's hard to define, and everybody has a different idea of what that means and that sort of thing. But we can kind of centrally come together on this fairness and impartiality thing, at least in some cases. Thomas Aquinas said that justice is the constant and perpetual will to render to everyone his due. That can, of course, suggest that someone is due bad things, but that is included in justice, I guess. But that description, the constant and perpetual will to render to everyone his due, seems to be the basic idea that Franklin has in his description of justice. Yes?
True. Many years ago, I worked in a little shop in Gatlinburg.
Yes.
And there was a lady that had a clothing shop for bigger women.
Can everybody hear her? I hope you can. Okay.
There was a lady that had a clothing shop just a couple of stores down from us for larger women. And one day there was a group of senior citizens that came in. And they were just stuffing things in their purses and everywhere. And she ended up having to lock the door and call the police. And they're thinking, well, they said, well, we're on a fixed income. We're senior citizens and we're on a fixed income, and we ought to be able to have these things.
This actually happened?
It really did.
So in other words, they were justifying stealing because they didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that brings to mind something I didn't write down.
But they had enough money to travel to Gatlinburg.
Yes, they did. You ever heard the phrase, the end justifies the means? That would be an example of it. I need clothes. Apparently can't afford clothes, therefore it's okay to steal clothes. That's a dangerous saying. There are times when the end does justify the means, but quite often it's used to describe a means that is very inappropriate. Sometimes, like that. Now, a person might be starving to death, in a certain situation, and might steal some food. And that's one of those edgy ones you're not really sure about.
I think we still have to ask for it. Yes.
In our day,
and we'll get it. Yeah.
In our day and in this society, it's much less of a necessity to steal food. Because if you go about it in the proper way, you can probably get food. Especially if you've got a church family. Again, we're kind of proud at times, and we will go without things that we really need because we won't ask. But that's what part of our family is for, is to look after each other. So you shouldn't need to do a shady means to get a desirable and good end. You should be able to work with your family in that regard. But anyway, the end does not necessarily justify the means. And as I say, usually people say that because the means is really heinous. But good is going to come from it. Well, I can think of a lot of things where good can come from something and the means is just very wrong. I'll give you an example. I think we should do what is the best for the most people. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So if I have 6 people who are dying because they need various organ transplants, I could save their lives by taking those organs from one perfectly healthy person and saving 6 lives. That's the best for the most people, isn't it? But it's definitely not right. So anyway, be careful. Be very careful if you use that phrase. So it appears that Franklin's idea was this desire to render to people their due. In general, I think he was thinking good rather than bad, but that's how that is. Those who uphold the laws, rules, and standards are rewarded. In fact, Paul talks about that in Romans. Those who do not are supposed to be punished, at least in our legal system. So injustice occurs when a person denies an individual or group either the punishment or reward that's due to them. Now, I'm talking in a secular sense here for the most part, because we're going to look at this in a different fashion here in a minute. So justice or injustice occurs when a person doesn't get their due. Okay. Yeah, okay. And remember, Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Basically, he was saying, pay your taxes. Don't cheat the government. If we deny an individual or a group their due, and how do we define what's due to them? I don't know necessarily, but mistreating people or impartial or partially or being prejudicial without being fair and even-handed would be an injustice. We've already mentioned the synonyms. Now, the Bible is full of references to righteousness, which I told you is one of the many synonyms of justice. But righteousness is more about generally being good rather than just being fair. So it's a much bigger word, I think, than justice. Righteousness includes many, many things beyond the word fair and, even-handed and impartial and things like that. Could be that. There are a lot of possibilities for it. In fact, when I started looking up this, I tried several different words. And of course, if you just type in just, you get all of the just as I am kind of, the word just. He is just happy. He is just, going over the hill or something. So you run into a lot of that. There you go. There you go. There are some Proverbs. In fact, Proverbs begins, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair. And then he continues to talk about additional reasons, values for the Proverbs. So Proverbs are helpful to us for doing what is right, just, and fair. There you go. There you go. Proverbs 8:20. He's talking. Wisdom has been personified as a woman in this chapter, and she is talking. And it says, wisdom is talking. I walk in the way of righteousness along the paths of justice. So here, righteousness and justice are parallel to each other in some ways. Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness. Now, here's the word where righteousness is used instead of justice, but some versions actually say justice here. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin condemns any people. Proverbs 21:3, to do what is right and just, okay, this is good. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. That's pretty big. To do what is right and just is even more important under the old law than sacrifice. Proverbs 29:7, the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. That's right. Better to give than to receive. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. For some strange reason, we tend to see people taking advantage of widows and orphans a lot. I guess people take advantage of the defenseless all the time. Micah 6:6-8, God is talking to the Israelites, and it's a fairly long reading. I'm going to try to skip most of it. It talks about with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and calves a year old? Will he be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of olive oil? If I offer my firstborn, is that going to please him? He says in verse 8, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? This ought to be good, shouldn't it? What does the Lord require of you? Here's the answer. To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So apparently justice and being just are big with God. Zechariah 7:9. This is what the Lord Almighty, by the way, that actually says, this is what, all of these, wherever they say Lord, is Jehovah. This is what Jehovah Almighty said. Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Now, when we get over into the New Testament, the word justice takes on a different meaning altogether. Yes, dear? That's correct. That those that rule well and are just. most common phraseology around the word just is justification. And almost invariably, it refers to how God's relationship is with us. We are justified by grace. We're justified by the blood of Christ. We have been justified. So there's not a lot of talk about being just in the New Testament. And there may be a reason for that. But if you look at Romans 1:17, and I'm reading from the King James Version here because the NIV uses the word righteous. It says, for therein, meaning in the gospel, for in the gospel is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Galatians 3:11 basically says the same thing, and Hebrews 10:38 basically says the same thing. And all three of these are quoting Habakkuk 2 verse 4, and the King James Version again says, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. And that's about it for the New Testament. And I think there's a reason for that, and we'll come to it here in a second. But the Old Testament was very much about taking, the eye for eye and tooth for tooth thing, deal justly, fairly, even-handedly. And I think that spills over into the New Testament too, but there's a slightly different slant on justice in the New Testament. For a few seconds, let's look at how we can be a just person. When you make a promise, keep it. And if you can't keep it, make whatever needed restitution there is for any negative results of your failure to keep your word. In other words, if you make a promise to somebody, keep it. If you can't, and there are negative consequences from it, do what you can to repair it, if you can. Most people are just sorry, right? I'm sorry, I forgot. I couldn't make it. Well, as a result of you not carrying out your promise, here's the negative results that occurred, and you can help that situation. Now, if there's nothing you can do, I don't know that you need to do anything about it, but you might need to make some kind of restitution if you fail to carry out a promise. So that's one thing you can do to be a just person. Yes, dear?
If you make a promise to somebody, if you can't keep it, you should never let them know.
Oh, absolutely. If you make a promise to somebody, by all means, let them know as soon as you know that you're not going to be able to keep it for whatever reason. And not being able to keep it because you don't want to is not a sufficient reason. That's not a sufficient reason. So be careful when you make a promise, but don't be the person that says, okay, I just won't promise anything. I won't commit to anything. Okay, that's just as wrong. Just as wrong. Be sincere and trustworthy, in other words, with your word. When you do something, do it well and do it honestly. That's an aspect of being a just person. You can be depended upon to do a good job to the best of your ability. You don't cut corners. Of course, cutting corners is a negative term. That doesn't mean doing. There's a difference between overdoing a job and just doing a good job. I sometimes wanted to do 150%, which of course is impossible. You can never do more than 100% of anything. Because if you did 150%, that's your 100%. But do a good job. Be honest to your employer and those you work around and all the work that you do. Another thing to be just, treat all people and their property. Sometimes that's not done today. Treat all people and their property with respect. My father was a huge rabbit hunter. He also did some dove hunting and a few other things, but he was a huge rabbit hunter. We raised registered beagle hunting dogs professionally for a number of years when I was a child. People flocked to him to go hunting with him because he had all the best hunting places on private lands, people's farms. And there was one reason that he had those privileges. He had this reputation for being extremely respectful of other people's property. He had privileges to hunt on people's land that nobody got privileges to hunt on. People showed up at his funeral. I thought I had another mother at his funeral. A woman shows up you don't know me, but, oh, Lord, there's my other mother, you know. And she talked about how she wouldn't let anybody hunt on her land except my father because he respected her property and took care of it and looked after it. You can get some pretty serious privileges if you're respectful of other people and their property and things like that. You need to leave it in better shape than you found it if you are using someone else's property. In fact, the Old Testament, I just now thought of this, if you are borrowing an axe, which was very expensive in those days, from someone and it broke while you were using it, you were responsible for replacing it. Or if you borrowed an animal and it died while you were using it, you were responsible for replacing it. Nowadays we go, well, it was sick already, so it wasn't my fault, or, you know, the handle was already weak, and when it broke, you know, it's not my fault, so here's your axe head back. No, you replace that. It broke under your watch. Be fair and honest and equitable in all interactions and transactions. Don't cheat anyone, including the IRS, especially those guys. But I highly recommend to you that you use all of the tax laws to your favor, if that's allowed. I saw an article the other day that said a candidate, I won't mention who, a candidate had used dubious tax laws to escape paying taxes. And this candidate said, no, those laws are on the books. I applied them exactly as written, not dubious. If you don't like people applying that law, you need to change it. By the way, the IRS said, nothing illegal here. If you can avoid a tax legally, by all means, do it legally. Not just because you want to, legally. And my rule is do your taxes as honestly as you possibly can, but when in doubt, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. If you have doubt as to which way it should go, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Why give the IRS the benefit of the doubt? If they don't like it, they'll be glad to tell you. They'll be more than glad to tell you about it. And you won't go to jail. I've had numerous cases where the IRS has called me up and said, or sent me a letter. We don't understand what you did here. Explain what you did. Well, I did this and this and this and this, and get a letter back for you. Okay, fine. That looks good to us. You know, I had a huge loss one year, a huge business loss. I went for several years without paying any taxes on my future incomes because that loss was being worked off over years. The IRS did not blink, not even a word from them. If you do your taxes honestly, you don't have to worry about it. Yes, dear?
If you don't pay your house will go for sale.
There you go. They'll sell the house if you don't. Okay, be fair and honest. When you must render some kind of evaluation or judgment, do so fairly and even-handedly without prejudice or partiality. When I worked at SEG, we had a situation where a man had a really cool motorcycle. And he had ridden it to work one day. And during a break, several people got out there and were admiring the motorcycle. And one of the office workers came out. Yes, she was a pretty young woman. Comes out and wants to ride the motorcycle. And the owner, being both a gentleman and wanting to show off, you know, says, sure, you can ride my motorcycle. She gets on it. A guy's standing behind it, holding it up. And they say, okay, go. And he gives it a shove. At the same time that she goes full throttle. About 2 seconds later, she runs into the side of a car. They're in a parking lot with cars. She runs into the side of a car. The guy that gave her the shove was accused of causing the accident. And being the safety manager for the company, I said, I will investigate. When I got done investigating, they wanted to fire the guy. When I got done with the investigation, I said, he may have a small percentage of the responsibility, but the majority of it goes to the girl. A fair fraction goes to the guy that let her get on. You let someone who knew nothing about riding motorcycles ride yours in the middle of a crowded parking lot. You're stupid. The girl gunned it and didn't put on the brakes. So she and the owner of the motorcycle shared the vast majority of the responsibility. The guy shared almost none. She was going to hit that car whether he shoved her or not. So you have to be fair and equitable. It would have been very easy to say, Sonny, it's all your, that was his name, because he always smiled. Sonny, it's all your fault. You're out of here. No, that was other people's faults. So we need to be fair and equitable and impartial. Don't be a judgmental person, which is usually negative, unless you want to be so in a very positive way. Have you ever heard of someone who's judgmental in a positive way? By admiring and pointing out positive things about other people. Most people are going, well, she's just a terrible housekeeper. I'm judgmental. She can't do this and she can't do that. How about being positively judgmental? I've noticed that you're extremely good at doing so-and-so, and I appreciate that so much. You're always doing this, that, and the other, and you dress so nicely, and you smell good. And that can get a little too personal. But don't be a judgmental person, at least not in the negative sense. Now, we're almost done here. Justice really only means providing what is deserved. In other words, fair and honest treatment. And sometimes getting what is deserved is not the best thing. And this may be the reason that the New Testament doesn't talk much about justice. As Christians, we should strive to be like God and provide people, wherever possible, with what they need rather than what they deserve. Another word would be grace, providing a person with what they need rather than what they deserve. Good example. You just don't have to be just to a server or a cashier or another driver of a car or something who's doing a bad job. Just would be to criticize them and not tip them well or something like that, right? You don't know what's going on with that person. You really don't. Maybe what they need is grace instead of justice. There are people who make it a point in life to criticize everything that's wrong with other people's lives. Thank you very much. I don't need that, thank you. I know what's wrong with my life already, thank you. What we need is grace. Same thing with children and everybody, especially me. I need a lot of grace from you guys, so lay it on. Tyra is possibly the most gracious person on earth because she does put up with me. So you've got to understand that's a lot of grace. Let's look at Ephesians 4:32. It is not about justice at all. Ephesians 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, which we don't deserve it, but forgiving each other. Why? Just as in Christ, God forgave you, which you don't deserve. So justice is not what is taught in the New Testament. Grace is what is taught in the New Testament. So just as love trumps faith, by the way, I'll give you the scripture for that. Love trumps faith. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, and now these three things remain, faith, hope, and love, which is unselfishness. But the greatest of these is love. So love trumps faith. But likewise, grace trumps justice. Justice is okay, but grace is way better, if that's possible. Sometimes it's not possible. And in our legal system, we generally don't practice grace. We practice justice to the best of our ability. But occasionally you'll see a judge provide a little grace every now and then. So, next week we're going to be talking about moderation. Moderation. So let's have our benediction and we will be done. May you be just in your treatment of others, but more so, may you give abundant grace to others, just as God has given you grace and continues to do so. Amen.